Welcome to Franchise Empires, where aspiring entrepreneurs learn exactly what it takes to become a successful franchise owner, from one location to 10 and beyond. I'm the Wolf of Franchises.
Hey everyone, it's the Wolf. Today in the show we have Jesse Konig, co-founder of Swizzlers, a new fast food chain out of Washington, D.C. Jesse is disrupting the billion-dollar fast food industry by taking a totally different approach to building a fast food restaurant, including vertically integrating his supply chain, which enables him to get fresh food directly from farmers to his restaurants. In this conversation, we go deep into how the fast food industry works and the potentially evil powers at play between lobbyists and what's known as big food. You might be shocked to learn how the food system truly works at scale, as well as just how bad legacy fast food is for you. As a hint, many of the ingredients we use in America in fast food restaurants are literally illegal to use in the state of California and many countries in Europe. So whether you're interested in this for your health, to learn about building a business, or otherwise, I think you'll enjoy the conversation.
The Wolf of Franchises is the CEO of Wolfpack Franchising, as well as a creator at Workweek Media. All opinions expressed by the Wolf and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Wolfpack Franchising or Workweek. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. The Wolf, Workweek, and Wolfpack Franchising may maintain positions in the franchises discussed on this podcast.
Obviously, you're co-founder of Swizzlers and Spudz. We're going to talk about a lot, but I kind of want to start at the beginning. I know this journey began in college. Could you just give us the idea of how you, a Wake Forest student, ended up, starting what became a restaurant?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I know the first time when we met, we sat down for like an hour talking, like 5 hours. So I'm going to try to be quick on some of the stuff on the story because I know we got tons of stuff to get into. But basically when we were in college, we were going to good school, planning to go into general white collar jobs like consulting or accounting or finance. And in that process, we're just not super excited about it. Everyone else was looking for internships. We talked to friends. No one loved what they were doing when they got into the working world. So sort of as an advanced form of procrastination, instead of getting internships, we started planning for our way that we could go out and travel after college and make some money on campus, start selling food. Back then we had this idea to do like these spiral cut hot dogs, start selling them on campus, use an entrepreneurship class, like launch them and like won this competition. And it was sort of this weird moment because it wasn't that we were like obsessed with food forever. We knew we were going to go into culinary. It was more like, wow, this is interesting. We get this feedback loop. People are really excited about it. We were just having fun. We spent another year building sort of a brand on campus and getting people excited about it. When it came down to, sort of like, we got to go get jobs or what are we doing here? We'd done a bunch of research on the food truck movement and fast casual. This was in 2014. So things had been well established like Chipotle, but this was around the time where sweet cream was starting to grow a lot and pizza, kava, just seeing all these like newer brands coming out and growing and food trucks were a thing. We're like, you know what? Like, we're going to regret it if we don't try to do this. And worst case scenario, if we're not stuck in one location, we can move the truck around. Worst case scenario, we can sell the truck. People are buying them. So we just kind of went all in and we decided to get a food truck right after we graduated. So we graduated in 2014, launched our truck in October 2014, Halloween. And that's how we got into the food world. We kind of just stuck with it ever since. I mean, as you might imagine, if not coming from years in the industry and all this stuff, like we had a very different approach to learning about these things, which I think has kind of led to where we landed today. Like we, for better or worse, just came in completely blind. We luckily would be surrounded by lots of chefs and restaurateurs, people that had food trucks, all this stuff. And because we knew nothing, we were young, just basically college students still, we just got used to asking a million questions and we started watching all the documentaries on Netflix and reading all the books and like taking maybe a little bit more of an academic approach and really makes sense. But it was cool. It really informed a lot of our curiosity and got us pointed in the right direction. And the business just sort of evolved from there to where it is today.
Yeah, no, I think the fact that you came in fresh, no like preconceived notion of how things are quote unquote supposed to be done. There's a lot of stories in entrepreneurship where, those can end up being the best businesses, right? Because, that you do something differently, and maybe you end up building a process or a product ultimately that's just different than what is typically created. But obviously you guys started as a hot dog food truck for the most part. It's a lot different today. I guess let's just start. So when did you go from food truck to saying, because you guys are primarily based out of Washington, D.C., when did that first store open? And how did the menu evolve into what is today, a more typical fast food style menu?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned, started right out of college. Our first 3 years, we kind of look at as we were sort of like quote unquote running a business, but really it was more of a hobby. Like, we had so much fun. We were all living together. We were going out, running food trucks, doing events, like drinking beers on the food truck when we were doing stuff. So like it wasn't the most the most like buttoned up business from day one. So I'd say our first 2 or 3 years are more like getting our mini culinary MBA type of like credentials and really learning more about what was going on. And it was about that point, 3 or 4 years in, we sort of looked in the mirror and we're like, there's way easier ways to make money and to make a living in the food industry. At the same time, we had so many people around us that were super passionate about what they were doing, and we kind of couldn't imagine going back and getting more of a quote unquote corporate job. So we sort of like looked at each other and thought, like, are we going all in? Are we like committing our lives to this, or are we going to go and figure out how to get out? Because it's been a fun run. We've got a couple food trucks, we've been doing farmers markets and catering. That's kind of local hustle, and that's really when the business started to shift. And we had this gourmet hot dog truck. Our tagline was "Old Dog, New Tricks." It was all about like trying to reimagine this like age-old hot dog. Was kind of where we were coming from. And there were some nuggets in there that actually have kind of been a through line to where they are today. And one of the biggest things was that we had tackled a food that was like quote unquote mystery meat. It had this really bad stigma around it, but there was also a lot of like nostalgia and fun, and like people like associate eating a hot dog with a baseball game or a backyard barbecue or friends and family.
Yep.
So we started like trying to piece together what was working, what was not, what could we do. And as I think what's great about the audience here, it's people that are in the franchise world are interested in that. Sometimes in food or not, but we all eat food, just kind of get it. But like hot dogs are just a tough business. It's not something people are eating 3 days a week, which makes it difficult. People eat a hot dog or 2 hot dogs a year sometimes. It's like I have my baseball game hot dog and I have my 4th of July hot dog and I'm done, which is not.
Yeah, and that's it.
Yeah,
exactly. See you next year.
Yeah, and it's funny. Like I'm kind of in that camp too, which is like a funny thing when you look back on it. Like it definitely helps to be passionate about what you're doing. And if we were like hot dog fanatics, like maybe we'd still be sticking with it. But we had this thought, like something's working, but it's not quite right. And we realized that fast food, when we really dug into it, in a lot of ways, had some shared similarities where it's got the negative stigma, the pink slime controversy about the chicken nuggets. It's got all the bad things that in a lot of ways I will probably get into. Like some of it's true and valid of why people have a negative stigma around it. But at the same time, like I have so many amazing childhood memories, like being a kid, Happy Meal, probably because we're getting marketed towards as kids. But, we had this idea if we could go and not try to be just another Shake Shack, just another better burger concept where we're, maybe 20% better on food quality and the same price or something like that. What we got really excited about was the idea of like, can we be truly competitive with a fast food brand, traditional quote unquote legacy fast food, big fast food, and do it like 10 times better than they do it for just a couple bucks more. So we got really excited about this idea. We started testing it because that had been something we'd learned a lot about from the food truck days. Like the best way to find out what's working is to go out and talk to customers and test things. So we like converted our farmers market setup to a test kitchen, started doing burgers there by the White House. We had like 50-person line of people would line up like before we even opened. We had this big following. We did a Kickstarter, raised like $20,000 to convert one of our trucks to do from hot dogs to burgers. We now had a hot dog truck and a burger truck. And slowly that kind of iterative process, we got to 2019, we had all this momentum. We finally signed our first lease. We're getting ready to open up our first brick and mortar down in the Navy Yard in DC, which is right next to Nationals Ballpark in Southeast DC, for those who are not in the area. But a cool spot, taking over a second-gen restaurant. I'm really excited to just like hit the ground running after we built all this momentum and hype. And then, of course, also the Nationals just won the World Series. We're opening next door to them. It's amazing. We're so excited. And then, like, we're literally building out our restaurant in March 2020 when COVID hit. So, like, we sort of had to pump the brakes and say, all right, what are we doing here? And we'll get into this, I'm sure, at some point in the story about how, in some ways, this whole COVID thing like led us in a really interesting direction because it forced us to play around with some things in our supply chain and do things a little differently. But that was when our first restaurant was opening. And we used, like, obviously COVID was terrible in so many ways. Food industry was decimated. But there were some things that we were able to use as an opportunity. Like, we built a lot of the restaurant ourselves, like basically to keep ourselves sane and stay out of the house during COVID and lockdowns and all this stuff. We learned a lot in that process. We streamlined our menu a ton. We were trying to get away from this hot dog identity early on into burgers. And we used COVID as an opportunity to be like, we got to stay afloat. We're trying to really make this work. Like, let's streamline our menu to be like a burger spot. That's what people want. So the process kind of went on, but basically got the restaurant open November 2020. Kind of muscled through a year and a half of COVID over there just because it was in the commercial side of the district. There wasn't a ton going on as people were not back in the office. Finally got a little bit of momentum. Then Omicron hit, and DC was one of those cities that was very uptight about some of these regulations and all these things, being shut down. So the restaurant really just got its legs back under it in the last 6 months. But it's been amazing that we've had the opportunity to be doing kind of this hand-to-hand combat and like getting really involved in the community and just putting out great food, sticking with it to our guns, iterating on the menu, adding a fried chicken sandwich, and getting to this fully fleshed out vision of a fast food concept or a better fast food concept. So yeah, it's taken a while to get there and it's gone a little bit slower, but it's allowed us to be really rock solid on the things we do well. And I think it's translated to people being excited. We went from the restaurant, brick and mortar open 2020. Now we're in all the major stadiums in DC. So we're in Capital One Arena where the Wizards and Caps play, and Nats Ballpark, and soon the Commander Stadium, FedEx Field. So having that exposure, having the exciting, I think we were talking about this before we went on air, but just got ranked with the number 5 burger by the Washington Post, which is cool to have happen.
Yes.
Literally posted today. So it's funny that like we're playing in this kind of fast food arena, like that's the way we think about it, but we're trying to put out quality that's competitive in the Maryland, Virginia set, which is like a pretty competitive food scene, maybe just below like the New York City or the San Francisco type of places.
Yep.
But yeah, it's been a hell of a journey to go from basically a hobby to doubling down and like really recommitting into it, and then getting a restaurant open, surviving COVID, lots of ups and downs throughout the way, and now to be on the other side of that and having the business have so much momentum again in the right direction and the numbers working out the way they're supposed to. It's exciting to be on that kind of the growth trajectory and what is the closest thing to quote unquote normal we've had since the pandemic hit.
Yeah. Well, no, look, I mean, congrats, man. I'm sure it's been a journey. You've definitely earned your stripes as a restaurateur, just to kind of be baptized by fire with COVID in the midst of a business transition. And yeah, I mean, look, I love what you're doing now, especially too, right? I think being in those stadiums is such a good way to get brand exposure. And then even just touching on what you said amidst that kind of quick summary of the Swizzler's journey to date, is that you said, we didn't just want to be another better burger concept like a Shake Shack or something. And here you are, like today, right? We just found out Washington Post ranked you as the top 5 burger in the area. So you're obviously on a taste level doing it right. But you also, as I learned when we met for coffee, there's a lot of things behind the scenes with the supply chain that's happening. So I kind of want to get into it. I think that's just fascinating for people to understand how the typical restaurants or just big fast food, right, in America works, and how you're different. And I know through this, you created Spudz, a CPG product of, frozen French fries that you buy at a grocery store. So we'll talk about how that kind of came about as part of the process. But I think it's just as a good start, to kind of set the table here. I mean, how does a typical restaurant source their food? You know, like I know there's U.S. Foods as a supplier, but like, you know, how does that typical process go if you're just starting a restaurant and like, I got to sell food to my customers? Like, where can I get it from? Because you can go local, right, to farmers, but there's obviously these massive companies that are shipping food nationwide.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a great entry point too. Just quickly going backwards a little bit to give some more context for the listeners. Going back to how we started with a little bit of an untraditional mentality of getting into the food industry, we had started learning about things like grass-fed beef early on. And like we knew even back when we were doing hot dogs, like, we just getting in the industry, we're trying to figure out this whole thing. We didn't feel great about factory farming and supporting that, and we were trying to figure out better ways. So even back then, we were shipping pallets of hot dogs from the Midwest to ourselves, working directly with the manufacturer to make our own grass-fed, grass-finished beef hot dogs. And we'll probably get into like some of the technicalities around how things are labeled, and there's differences between grass-fed, grass-finished, all that. But all that being said, we in our current business, what makes us different is that we work with a lot of these suppliers that are what we think are really important pieces of the puzzle. So like we have a farm that we work with that we get regenerative grass-fed beef. Again, we'll get into some of the technicalities of what that means, but really high quality beef. We work at local buns. That being said, like we are trying to be super competitive on price. So we've shopped around with all the big suppliers. We try working with the little guys. We've had a lot of experiences across the board. And for some of the folks who are longtime franchisees, franchisors, people in restaurants, this will be sort of common sense things. For those outside the food world, it can kind of blow your mind as you get a little bit of a peek behind the curtain. But most things in food are sort of centralized, done quote unquote one way. And I think a lot of this is built to support growth at all costs and like really scaling brands. And like it kind of goes back to McDonald's when they got started in the 50s or 60s. And their whole thing was like they wanted to be from sea to shining sea. They were just trying to get out there, and they cared less about food quality and all about consistency. They cared about how do I basically ship these consistent flavors, these calories basically, without a whole lot of thought into nutrition or where it's coming from or all these things. And when you're scaling that fast, like you've got to kind of take certain shortcuts. You've got to work with certain partners that are going to allow you to do these things. So for example, if a brand like Five Guys, which I know at one point during their heyday, I think they opened 1,200 units in 1 year. That's an incredible feat for anybody. Like just think about building one restaurant, now do 100 a month, right? Like, so just thinking about that is like, it's kind of
insane.
Unbelievable. So if you think about it, you're trying to open 100 restaurants a year, let alone 1,200 a year, to get food all over the country, whether it's your franchisees, your corporate-owned restaurants, you have to have a supply chain that's able to reach all of your stores. So these companies have cropped up to be able to support that kind of growth. Two of the biggest ones are US Foods and Cisco. This is like SYSCO, because I know there's a Cisco and a CISCO, which I think does chemicals and other stuff like that.
Okay, good. Yeah, good.
Yeah, so anyone's getting their Google on. Yeah, Cisco and US Foods are the big ones. And they call these guys broadliners. And the idea is that your broadliner can do kind of anything you need. And for most, like, quote unquote, corporate chains, a lot of franchisees, they're using these companies because they're sort of a one-stop shop. And if you think about it, your restaurant, it's easier when you're ordering from one place to hit your minimums. One truck comes X amount of times per week, you get all the stuff you need, right? And when you're a big company, you also have buying power with these guys. They do rebates and crazy things to help the franchisors or help these big businesses make more money. They've got maybe special deals. Yeah. So there's a lot of economic incentives. But the downside of working with these companies is, one, from like being a smaller business or being like what our experience, you're sort of like a cog in the wheel. Unless you're one of their big customers, you're not getting this like super amazing experience working with them. It's like you're just one of the other things. They'll try to help you out with some sort of customization, but at the end of the day, you're just kind of buying from their catalog. And when you're buying from their catalog, you're getting exposure to all the same ingredients that every other kind of mom and pop restaurant has. And they're mostly competing on price, not quality. So that's like the main landscape of these broadliners. And they have, meat, chicken, they've got French fries, they've got potatoes, they've got produce, chemicals, ketchup, all the stuff you need. A lot of the brand names, but a lot of like the generic stuff. And the kind of crazy thing beyond that too is like they have their own house brands. Let's say they have like a house mayo, a Cisco or US Foods mayo. And they can get it to you for, I don't know, prices have been all over the place since COVID, but let's just say it's like $10 a gallon. It's super cheap. You're getting a great deal. They usually will also, like, under their brand names, go out and shop these things in different manufacturers. So if you're buying a house, quote unquote, product from them, there's no guarantee you're getting the same thing from one week to the next. If you're building your recipes off of the stuff they're doing, there's no like real brand name. There's no accountability, let's say, to the quality of what you're actually getting. And let alone also these crazy things that happen, like their prices will slowly creep up on you. You'll negotiate certain deals and have to audit them. So there's all these crazy things. There's another layer below that where there's some of these suppliers where they went super niche. So whether it's niche in one area, one geography, where they're just trying to give you better service in like the DC area or the New York area, or they're taking a very specific philosophy around how they think about foods. Like there's D'Artagnan, I believe, up in the New York area, or Baldor, who we've worked with. These places, they might focus on higher end restaurants or focus on like really high quality meat, or trying to do local programs so you can get access to local food. So they do some things really well, but then if there are other things you need, they're a little bit more cost conscious. You're not going to be able to get a great price, let's say, on like Heinz ketchup, which maybe your customer wants Heinz ketchup, and you're not going to convince them to switch to some fancy thing that's different and more expensive. So there's so many things in the decision tree. But at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is like the reason some of these things were built were to accomplish scale, and they're really good at that. But it's like that idea of like, if you have a hammer, everything else looks like a nail, like you're trying to find nails all over the place. When you look at an industry that's constantly built for like centralizing things and for scale and for getting good prices, those are all really important things to scale a restaurant. Don't get me wrong, but they also don't account for a lot of the other things that are super important, like nutritional value, or, you know, having a relationship with the farmer, or like how much is the farmer getting paid. And like, we'll talk more, I'm sure, about like our philosophy around things, because I think we try to be super practical. Like taste has to come first. We're not trying to have this like really evangelical opinion and approach and perspective on like what people should or shouldn't be eating. Because at the end of the day, if I don't serve Coca-Cola in my restaurant and that's what someone wants, I'm giving them a reason and a friction point to go eat at Five Guys or go eat at McDonald's or whatever it is. And if I'm doing that, then that's another dollar supporting these bigger chains that, in our opinion, aren't doing as good of a job on things like sourcing or providing, you know, higher quality food to people. So there are these trade-offs you need to make, and you need to sort of think in terms of what is the most important thing right now? What am I going to need to do to accomplish our vision and stay aligned with our values? And then how can we get better over time? Or how do we, in some cases, take on more complexity to get a better product at the right price that's going to be competitive with these things? We'll talk about Spudz later, I'm sure, but it's kind of like, because we're not restaurant people, we've done a lot of weird, sometimes harder things that, in our opinion, have helped us learn a lot about the back end systems of some of this stuff. And we hope, you know, be more competitive in the long term with some of these bigger companies.
No, it's fascinating. And I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head with just talking about US Foods and Sysco. And I mean, the reality is, right, they were built for scale, and that is the goal of any fast food franchise, is that they are scaling flavor, so that if you show up at a McDonald's in Arkansas or Washington or Florida, it's going to taste the exact same. That is the goal. So yes, food suppliers have evolved to be able to accommodate that. For not just fast food restaurants, like a lot of restaurants.
Well, just jump in on one thing real quick. That just brought to mind too. Like, just to give a counter example, and I know you're super familiar with these guys, is like In-N-Out Burger, right? Like, there's other ways to grow and have scale and achieve consistency and achieve quality and price. And like their strategy, as you're very well aware of, is like stay regional, stay close to a home base, think about where you're doing things. So, and for also, just to give you all the listeners out there, break down the wall for a second, like, if you're listening to this podcast, you made it this far, like, one, like, you're my people. It's awesome to have you listening. But like my business partner and I, like, for example, we were in California on a business trip, and like our wives were there and doing work remotely and like hanging out by the beach. We rented a car and went to Anaheim, and like outside of the main drag, and went to 5 In-N-Outs in a row and just sat in each one for like an hour watching this like ballet of operations and things they do super consistently and how they do things. So if you're anything like us, where you go into a restaurant, you go into a business, and you're looking behind the counter and trying to figure out what point of sale they're using or what they're doing that's unique, we're a good company. I would love to chat. But yeah, in and out, I just want to bring that up because I think people think that there's like only one way to do things. I want to have a franchise. I want to achieve scale. Like I want to be competitive on a large scale with these big companies. And there are ways to be thoughtful around growth where you can take an approach, build the infrastructure, build up a way to support the business and achieve the things you want without just hitting the easy button and saying, well, US Foods can get me from DC to California and I can open 500 units a year and I can sell this thing in 4 years. Like if that's what your hustle and you want to like flip these things, that's what you're trying to do, more power to you. But I think as we'll get into, like there's a lot of implications of being a restaurant, person serving food, and like our buying pattern matters. And like there's a big food system and lots of people eating this stuff all over the country. So I think just having that in people's mind, like, yes, there are things that US Foods and Sysco has done well for the industry. And there's also ways to do all the things you want to do in terms of scale. It might take a little bit more patience, a little bit more creativity, a little bit more complexity. But in some ways, that's going to build your moat. That's going to make you an iconic institution like an In-N-Out over time where you can maintain quality, maintain your values, and still grow the concept and create a lot of value for yourself, your shareholders, your customers, all those things.
Yeah, no, In-N-Out's fantastic as a case study. And I mean, obviously, right, like they are today, I mean, a lot of people don't own a company that has 250 restaurants nationwide, but at the same time, when you relatively to the big fast food chains, like that's actually a very small footprint. So it definitely has had an impact on their growth. Of course, the average location of an In-N-Out is doing, far more than other fast food concepts, and they have this cult following and brand that is just, people are obsessed with. So it's really interesting what the slow and steady approach can do. But I do want to, so I want to ask, I mean, you did mention, right, like about the big food systems. It seems pretty easy to just be like, well, like, I guess I should buy from them because it's just going to make it easier. It's a one-stop shop, prices, yada, yada, yada. But you're effectively just buying a commoditized product. So, what effectively you started out, right, as a restaurant. I mean, what did you end up doing? Because if it's either try to find a localized supplier, like you mentioned, like a niche one, or, I mean, in my head, I'm like, could you go straight to the farmer? Because, right, you just cut out the supplier. So, like, yeah, what did you end up doing to be different and try to maintain the nutritional value in the meals you're serving?
Yeah, I mean, I think one, there is no like silver bullet. Like you can do it a lot of different ways. That's one of the really amazing things about owning a business, and one of the most frustrating things is that there's not necessarily a right answer on this stuff. We've tried a lot of different things and thrown stuff at the wall. And I think here's what I would say if you're thinking about this is, number one, it's always beneficial to have a relationship with the farmer, the producer, the manufacturer. Like you should go shake their hand, see where the food is coming from, see what their process is like. Because one, it makes you a more educated business owner. You can tell that story to your customer. Might be ways to help you, improve and drive your business. But I think the other piece of it is you can learn a lot about what makes their business work and how you can be a good partner for them. So, for example, we talked about grass-fed, grass-finished beef a little bit. We might into that a little bit deeper in a bit. But we basically found that this kind of regenerative farming, we really believe in this idea that you can use cattle in a way that can help improve soil health, and you can keep them on grass their whole life. And what's interesting about this whole system is that these farmers can sell, let's say, like their steaks. They have a great market for it. So they make their money and their profit. But as we learn more about it, we actually found out that ground beef for them was like a waste stream. So this ground beef that they have, if we could find a way to make it work, like, yeah, it's not going to be as cheap as commodity, like, centralized beef where they're, kind of feedlots and all crazy stuff that's going on, which there are a lot of costs to that don't get translated to the customer when you think about some of the externalities around our healthcare system or the insurance that goes out to farmers. There's a lot of crazy stuff in the background. But with these farmers, we realized if we could be a steady supplier or steady buyer, of the ground beef from these farms, we're actually helping them grow their business. So we had this little bit of a helpful, synergy in working with them, where we're helping to essentially like be their growth engine to allow them to get more cows on their property and be more profitable, run a better business. So when we learned about that, we then were able to kind of connect the dots a little bit more in our business model. And sure, like you mentioned, you could go super direct, like get your own trucks or work with other people that truck things directly to you. And there are definitely times where that makes sense. There's benefits, but all of the stuff in our business is a game of nickels and pennies. And there's also the cost of like mind share, like how much complexity you want to take on. Like how do you make things really easy to replicate for your teams on the ground serving food? And sometimes there can be some complexity in the background. But we found is that by having a relationship with the farmer, or the producer, the manufacturer, you learn a lot about their business, where you can cut out waste, where you can, be helpful, where you can, how you can make things work. And then you can then like connect the dots with distributors, right? So if you have the buying power, you've got some units open, you can go and talk to your distributor. And sometimes they're willing to bring on these other products because they know, similarly, if you understand their business, they need to move, pallet slots are worth so much money to them. If you can move a certain amount of cases per week, it's justified in their business. They could bring on new products just for you. So sometimes you can find ways to negotiate with your suppliers. And this is where having a more regional supplier or a smaller guy than US Foods or the Cisco, they're going to usually be a little bit more nimble and willing to take on some of this complexity. And you also, like, one thing it took us a while to learn, and again, people in the restaurant business for a long time will probably like be shaking their head, like, I don't even know how you guys are still in business without knowing this. But being able to talk to your suppliers and be able to work out agreements where you actually understand how they're making money off of each sale, right? Like when you figure out that there's a certain percentage or dollar markup on every item you're getting or every case, and that's how they make their money and calculate whether you're a good customer for them. And you can create deals and structures in place where like, hey, on these 5 items we go through most of, I need a better rate per case. Or instead of it doing it by percent, I want to do it by dollar amount, because if my price goes up 30% and my $40 case of fries is now $50, not doing public math here, so I'm rounding a lot of things, right? But so like that $40 case is now $50. If I'm paying 10%, like that's an extra 50 cents coming out of my pocket for them to do the exact same job. And of course, like gas prices change, they have to pay their employees, more stuff happens on their business too. And it's always good to be a reasonable partner and not be like, well, what's going on here? You're charging us an extra 30 cents. But by being cautious around how you set these things up and working directly with the farmer, understanding the price they're selling it for, working with your distributors, knowing how they're making money, how you can kind of really understand their business, you have that full transparency where like maybe you're not fully integrated and running your own trucks and all this stuff, but you have a little bit more control of your supply chain. You feel like you understand it better. And that's always going to allow you to have more control over having a better product at the end of the day. So I think long answer here, but one, it's like really being bought into the quality of what you're looking for and what's important to your business. And then being able to actually go meet those suppliers, get the specs right, get the costs right, working with the distributor or working with doing it yourself, if that makes sense for your business, and finding ways that you can just like build a supply chain that you feel really good about and you feel like it's going to be able to grow with you, and being realistic about what your growth goals are, right? Like to your point, if you're trying to be more competitive on a national level and be scaling and growing quickly, you're going to need to make sure you're not working with like some family farm or like some tiny little bakery that you're going to be doing 150% of their business that they can produce in a week just for you, right? Like they have other customers, like they have to make investments. So there's a little bit of a game there where you've got to be thinking about growth, thinking about where your business is headed, and trying to keep an open line of communication so that you can be set up for success and be able to grow at the rate that you want to too.
Yeah. So just to kind of paint the like ecosystem, right? You have farmers, distributors, and then you, the restaurant. Is it a 3-chain system, or am I missing?
No, there's other steps in there too. So like it depends on what products you're looking at, right? But like generally, there's going to be.
Let's just stick with like beef and potatoes.
Yeah, those are great examples. So beef is number one, let's say, right? Like there's actually a multi-part system to the farming of beef. There's going to be what they call a cow-calf operations. This is where they're basically just like breeding cows and calves. Makes sense, right? Like moms and calves, they're there on the property, and they keep them all in grass for some certain period of time. I don't know, call it 6 or 8 months, something like that. And I hope everyone knows here too, like we're very curious. Like I've learned a lot about this stuff, but I wouldn't call myself necessarily an expert on any specific thing here. So I'm going to be maybe talking in some generalities, but they're directionally right. And if anyone's got questions of going deeper, like I can definitely point you to the right resource. But so again, cow-calf operation, you get it set up over there and you're breeding, and some farms are really caring about genetics, or like, is it Black Angus? Is it a different type of, steer? That's one piece of it. This actually might be a good time to describe grass-fed, grass-finished, regenerative beef quickly.
Give us, what does it all mean? Because like people see the buzzwords and it's like, and then there's organic and there's all these different labels to try to, which at a certain point to the consumer, it's just like, okay, this person just wants me to buy their food by slapping all these labels on it. Like, so like what's legit? What's actually like an ethically sourced form of beef, and what is the true impact if it has some of these labels on it? So if you can go through it all, that'd be great.
So I think one thing to keep in mind is that there's this concept of greenwashing it's real. So like there's a huge marketing machine in the food industry. Like as soon as this new thing pops up, these huge companies that aren't necessarily doing these things the right way will try to figure out a way to, quote unquote, trick customers more or less into thinking that they're doing things the right way. So grass-fed is this label and this thing that came out maybe like, 10 years ago. And it actually meant something back then. When someone said grass-fed, what they meant was 100% grass-fed, grass-finished. Now we've had to start talking in terms of 100% grass-fed or grass-fed and grass-finished to say the same thing. So grass-fed, what I mean today, just means that cows are eating grass. So like I mentioned, every cow starts usually in the cow-calf operation. Right? So like every cow is born in the cow-calf operation, from my understanding, and they eat grass there, right? At some point in their life, they have to eat grass because that's what cows are meant to eat. So their bodies are built for it. They're called ruminants, right? That's how they were evolved. Grass-finished, what it means is that the cow stayed on grass its entire life. So there's all these different spectrums in the grass-fed world where like you could be grass-fed for the minimum amount of time and then throw onto a feedlot. They could be grass-fed for a certain amount of time, and then their theory is that like we can finish it, quote unquote, on grain. So they'll switch to feeding it grain because they think there's more like fat or marbling or flavor. Again, like I don't want to debate it with people. I personally think that grass-fed, grass-finished is kind of like the gold standard, and you can get really amazing, high-quality beef, steaks, ground beef, all this stuff without using things like green that these cows' bodies aren't designed to eat. But there are some people that might debate it, so we don't need to go into that. But anyway, so there's grass-fed, there's grain finishing, there's other ways they finish cattle. The grass-fed,
is that a taste thing though? Is it like, so grass-fed, grass-finished? Are we doing, is that for taste, or is there even there's so much probably to go into, like is it the ethical side that like, hey, they're meant to eat grass, you should have them eat grass their whole life, and then there's the environmental aspect of like some of this food like causes a lot of methane production on the back end, and that's what the plant-based meat companies are promoting, why they're a better option. So I guess, is it more taste, or is there more to it than that?
It's a good question. It's going to take us down a rabbit hole. I'm glad we're going there. So it's sort of like all of the above, right? So like when you think about the way these animals adapted and evolved over time, right? Like I mentioned this term ruminants. So that's like the same thing as like bison or buffalo. Like there was millions of bison and buffalo going across the country at some point in time in North America. There's obviously not that today, just based off how we kind of developed in our farming systems and all these things. And like, there's all these crazy stats, especially from companies that like, oh, surprise, they're incentivized to dissuade people from eating meat and to eat plant-based meat. So you wonder why they're bringing up these things. But like, there's things about water use, there's things about all these different land use issues with grass-fed, grass-finished beef. A lot of that stuff, it's just like kind of crazy to see it all play out and get debated, because the stats, when you dig into them, are just so far afield. Like the things about water use, for example, they make it seem like it's the same kind of water that you and I drink. And they're like, oh, this cow is, using hundreds of gallons of water that like otherwise is not going to be like, people aren't going to be able to drink this water. It's like, well, this is actually like water that's from rain that is in like a system that is like a part of our environment, and it's going into creeks and streams. And like, this isn't water like that you and I drink, right? Like, and like they also urinate, like it goes back into the system and it kind of like all filters through. So it's a very like natural, holistic process. The other issues with going into things like grain finishing or feedlots and like feeding them corn and soy, which is even worse, is that the idea of like inflammation and how the nutrients profile, the macronutrient profile of the cattle changes. And like, again, I'm not like a nutrition expert or a meat expert in these ways. There's people that can speak this stuff better than I can. But the general idea is like, if you think about you and I, we sit on the couch, or let's say we're working out, we're eating salads, we're crushing great steaks, like we're in really good shape. And then like we do that for 6 months or a year, and we're like in our prime beach body, we're looking good, we're ready to go, feeling great. If we sat on the couch for like 4 weeks or 6 weeks and just ate Doritos and barely moved, like our bodies, like the way it's built, the way our like blood scores would test, the hospital, all the stuff is going to crash really quickly, right? And that's essentially what these finishing operations are doing. Like they're feeding these animals like basically like junk food to fatten them up so that in their mind they can get this like marbling, this fatty thing that people think they want, and they see the steaks. I've seen like these grass-fed, grass-finished operations, especially the ones that are regenerative, which we'll talk about in a second, and they do rotational grazing. Like you can get a cow that's just eating grass, like they quote unquote eating salads. If they're only eating that, but they're doing it in a thoughtful way where they're always eating this like lush pasture and they're moving around through the property, like they get this amazing same type of marbling and fat, like incredible steaks, all the stuff that you want from a beef if you're eating it. And I just think it gets really confused because people, when they think of grass-fed, they sometimes think of like stuff from New Zealand or Australia, or like if you just let a cow roam like thousands of acres of property by itself with no management, it's gonna like be kind of like a deer, right? Like it's just out there constantly walking around and moving. It might just be like eating a little bit of grass here and there. Like that, of course, is not gonna lead to like a super rich, fatty, delicious steak. Like they're gonna be more lean. They're gonna be like potentially like tasting like an odd flavor. It's an animal. It's out and it's more like venison at that point. But when you have this thing called like holistic management or regenerative practices, what they essentially do are using cows as a tool in like an ecosystem to help improve the soil health. And there's some really amazing stats. Like you can even just look up pictures. You're on Google, go like Google Images, like regenerative farm before and after. And you'll see these plots of land that like 3 or 5 years before are basically desert. And then 4 or 5 years later, you now have like lush grasses and bugs are coming back and birds. And there's a whole ecosystem. And like when you see that, when you go and visit a farm and you walk and they're like, yeah, like look over here. We didn't do anything there to test. And now look at this area that we're walking through. You just look at the ground, you see earthworms and beetles and birds flying around and foxes poking around and deer coming through. You're like, huh, this seems like it's probably better for the environment. It is. It's generating topsoil. It's like making the soil more resilient. So like there's not things like erosion that are happening. It actually absorbs water when there's rainfall. There's all these crazy things. So just a quick recap. We have like on the beef side of things, there's less inflammation. They are, living a better life, like a more natural life. They're in a herd. They're being treated well, humanely their whole life. So like from a nutrition standpoint, like we're eating that meat, like common sense, right? Like a cow that's happy, that is like eating healthy, that is like treated well, isn't going to have all this like inflammation, hormones, all these crazy things in that. It's going to taste better and it's going to be better for you. And for the environment, there's a win-win because like they're being used in the system where they're creating healthier soil. So that's where this idea of regenerative grass-fed beef comes from. We're like 100% regenerative grass-fed beef. That's the kind of ground beef that we use. And it's just working with farms who are being thoughtful around how they manage their land and manage their livestock, their cattle in particular. Because we think it's like the right way for the animals to be honored and respected. We think it's better for people's health. We think it's better for the environment. And, at the end of the day, like if we're going to be serving food and be spending money and supporting an agricultural system, we want to make sure it's the one that like we believe in. And we think there's a way you can actually scale that and grow it. But I think this is a long-winded way to get to the question you actually asked up front was like, how many steps are in the process, right? So there's like cow-calf operations and beef. Then there is like wherever they're going to be moved to, right? So like they're going to move to like either a regenerative managed farm where they're part of this like system and they're going to live there their whole life, or they're going to be in some system where they're on a farm for most of their life, maybe they get sold into a finishing operation, or they're getting shipped out to these CAFOs or like feedlots, which are disgusting and gross. That is another thing that happens. But basically, the cows move to some point. They're brought to what's called a processing facility where they're actually like processed, which is the funky word.
The morgue.
Exactly,
for the cows.
right? They're killing the cows there. So they're processing the cows. They kill them there.
Yeah.
And usually those are not, from my understanding, the same place that they're going to then be like making ground beef and stuff, right? So a lot of times there'll be a processing facility where they will kill the cows. They will like, get the bones out of there. They'll cut them into primals, like the big sections. They'll hang them and do like the aging process to get these like delicious steaks and things we want.
Okay.
And then usually like those primals, the trim, like those types of things are then sent to other facilities where they're getting like maybe cut into steaks, or maybe they're getting processed into ground beef. And then that's the stuff that ends up,
Sure.
to the distributor that goes to the restaurant or goes to the grocery store. So there's like multi steps in that process where like the cow is being raised.
So between farmer and distributor, there's some variation in like the processing of it effectively.
And similarly for like potatoes, right?
And,
like there's like usually like a seed process. They need to get the seed potatoes. Then they're going to actually be growing the potatoes in the ground somewhere. And then they're going to be harvesting those potatoes, and they get shipped to like sometimes a centralized facility where they're being like sorted and like boxed and distributed. Sometimes it's going directly to a place that's using them to make potato chips or make like French fries. So there's a lot of variation, but generally like there's always going to be a farmer or someone who's raising these animals, these vegetables at some point. There's like a seed, quote unquote, which can be like a cow-calf operation, or it could be like a seed production farm. And then there's going to be some sort of like finishing step in the production normally, like in manufacturing. And then it gets out to distribution, which for a lot of goods we have, distribution could be the grocery store, like Whole Foods, right? Like it could be going out there, or it could be distributed to restaurants or to cafeterias or to wherever it's going to be consumed by the end customer.
Okay. No, that's super helpful, I think, for everyone to understand. And I'm glad you brought up potatoes, because I do want to get into that as well. But just to tie the loop on the beef side, so you really went through, I think, at a detailed level, right? Like grass-fed, grass-finished, and what regenerative means. And you've obviously, like, right, you have walked farms. I know you've flown out to, like, I think when we met for coffee, you said, like, farms in North Carolina. And, like, you've done trips around this to really see it firsthand, like, the impact of this regenerative grass-fed, grass-finished beef process. But can you, as a restaurant owner, because I want to tie this back into Swizzlers and what you're doing with your supply chain, like, so you've learned that, and maybe someone's listening to this and saying, great, like, well, like, can I like click the order option for US Foods and just be like, yeah, I want the beef that's doing that because I want to, feel good and like check all the boxes, nutritional value, ethical for the cows, and better, it seems better for the environment. Like, can you do that, or is that not as easy? And like, yeah, is it as simple as that, or is there more to it if you wanted to do it as a restaurant owner?
Unfortunately, right now there isn't an easy button for it, especially if you're working with folks like US Foods and Cisco. The problem, again, we talked about this idea of greenwashing, is that if you don't take the time to like kind of educate yourself on this process, they might say they have a grass-fed product, and they'll show it to you and they'll sample it, and they'll give you the whole like dog and pony show. When you dig into the details of it, most likely, my guess, is that the grass-fed product either isn't grass-finished, or it's from Australia and New Zealand. And like Australia and New Zealand don't have as fucked up of a food system as we do in the United States. Like they actually do things like naturally. It's not going to necessarily be like holistically managed, regeneratively raised, where it's contributing to soil health and all these things. You're not going to know much about it. It's probably from a lot of different farms at once. So like there's that piece of it. So there's a lot of unknowns when you're working with it. There are also distributors that are set up for these things. Like Baldor, we work with out of New York. They've got some stuff in the DMV, which is DC, Maryland, and Virginia, down this way. And they have like a big local program in grass-fed. And that's how we've been able to work with Joyce Farms, which is the farm we've done a lot of work with in the last 5 or 6 years down in North Carolina and Georgia. And there's a whole supply chain that they've kind of built around that stuff. So there are people that are making strides in the right direction. But if you don't have that option available to you, there are also ways that you can do this more direct. You can work with farms. The biggest thing is that they're just going to not be, to your point, like an easy button. It's not going to be, let me just pull up like the US Foods portal online and find a grass-fed beef box and buy it. If you're going to do that, just stick with conventional, save the $1 a pound or whatever, because you're not doing anything different It's just like, so you can say grass-fed on your menu. Like, that's not really, in my mind, the right way to do it. If you are trying to genuinely source high-quality, better beef, like, take the extra step to really educate yourself on it. Maybe think about, like, is there some more complexity, or like work with other people. There are some awesome leaders in the space who are trying to build local or regional networks to help set this stuff up and support more farms. Like, hit me up. We'll talk about at the end if I can find me, but I'm happy to folks if I do have any contacts or ideas of people doing some stuff like this. But like, the problem is the labeling, the marketing, the greenwashing. It's going to try to sell it to you like there's an easy button. And I'm like 99% confident that, especially through these big suppliers, they aren't doing this stuff the right way. And especially not that regenerative, like 100% grass-fed kind of gold standard type of thing. And we're doing our best to make sure we can make that as, accessible to other people too, and like help, really prove out the model that works and find the right farms that are at the right size to scale with us and scale with people. But there's a way. And like, what's cool about this stuff is when it is figured out and someone does, it's actually a lot cheaper in some ways for them to produce these cattle, right? Like, there are no inputs. It's just grass and land, and they're not mowing. They're not spending money on gasoline. Like, you can fit a lot of cows onto a pasture where they're getting raised the right way, and there's a lot less cost and middlemen and all this stuff. So like, there's hope. I think like there's a lot of fucked up things about our food industry that we're going to continue to talk about in this call, but I think the big thing to keep in mind is like, we're very optimistic, because I think people that are taking the time to listen to this podcast, we're excited about this type of thing, or pissed off, honestly, either way. There are ways that we can all work together to help set this stuff up and do it in a way that's more regional, it's, more direct, that's helping farmers do this stuff. And you can have a better product for your customer, you can get it at a great price, and you can, support it at the farm and know that story and feel good about it. And there's a way to make it work. It's just going to take a little bit more effort than hitting the easy button and just ordering through your catalog where it is today.
Yeah, no, well, it's great to kind of hear the breakdown. And I mean, I imagine, there are so many layers to this. It's not, it's the environment, it's the cows, it's the farmers, and then, it's obviously like emissions great, but let's be honest, people aren't going to do this as like a charitable effort. If they're losing money on it, it's just not going to be sustainable. So I think to really want to have a long-term solution, you have to find a way where people can make money doing it. So I like that you kind of have that practicality element built into this. But just to kind of give folks a comparison point. So, the end result of that grass-fed, grass-finished, regenerative, meat process that you explained, for your customers, that means they get a burger at your restaurant, more natural. There's none of this dog shit in it. And, obviously all the chains along the way, the farmer and whatnot, then the environment, like there's a better feeling around it all. But can you tell us like what is McDonald's or Burger King? And I know like Wendy's has their slogan of, fresh, never frozen, but like, what are they just in general? I guess I'm not trying to get into the specifics of brands, but like, big fast food, like what do they do? Are they doing these meat processes? I'm going to guess no. And I also know there's a lot of chemicals in the food. And the thing that you said when we spoke, you were throwing stats at me about French fries, and I know potatoes is a different ballgame, so we can like segue into that. But yeah, like you were even saying, like there's ingredients in the buns and in the meats that are like illegal in Europe, but we're just eating them every day here in America. It's like, yeah, what is the meat process like for, let's call it quote unquote big fast food?
Yeah, I can give a general, my general thoughts on the meat and big fast food. And maybe this is a good place to kind of get into just like big fast food and how fucked up it is across the board. Because there's a lot of points here that are fun to go into. But with beef, they are similar to like the U.S. Foods and Cisco cropped up to support the growth of these brands trying to go across the country. The whole like meat industry, and honestly like our whole government supported food system is all, for better or worse, like completely fucked up. And it is controlled by like lobbying, all these things that allow these operations and certain like centralized big players in the space to thrive monetarily, but kind of at the expense of everybody else. In the middle of the country, I don't know exactly where, and again, not an expert. There's an amazing book actually called Fast Food Nation that like, it's a little bit old, but it goes really in depth into potatoes, into meat processing. And like, I know there's one story in it. It's kind of going through and showing a day in the life of somebody working at a processing facility. And if like one of the craziest things, there are these feedlots that are like, they basically concentrate, I think it's concentrated animal feeding operations, CAFO. It's like feedlot everyone hears about. They basically bring all these cows into a giant pen. They're like not living on grass. They're fed in these big troughs, just like mixes of corn and soybeans and like all these other subsidized cheap things we're growing all over the country. The government is like helping fund, which honestly is how you get things like the dollar menu and beef. It's so cheap. It's because like we're paying for it with our tax dollars, which is also kind of a crazy thing. But they're shipping in food from all over the country to these feedlots to give calories to these cows, to fatten them up. When they're sick, they're getting shot with antibiotics and hormones to keep them alive, basically. And then they're getting processed nearby in these giant facilities. And like, I don't know the exact stat. I don't want to misquote it, but just for sake of what we're talking about, they're killing a cow like every 5 minutes or something like that. It might even be faster than that. Like they're basically, someone's working at these places and there's just like an assembly line going through and they're just like killing cows and breaking them down into their parts. And it's like completely like just a crazy thing, a crazy experience. And like, as you imagine, probably not a very great place to work. And this is why like during COVID and the pandemic, it really showed how shaky and fragile our food system is because we're so centralized into these like few packers, these few processors, these few facilities in the middle of the country that are supporting the calories that go out all over the place. That like if someone gets COVID and like they get other people on their line sick and they can't find people to fill these jobs, like now you've got cows that are getting killed because they are like on their land getting shot because they don't have anywhere to bring them to kill them because they're getting too fat or too sick to keep alive. Because we built this whole system that's like, one input in, one input out. So basically truly like a factory looking at animals and as part of a process as if it's like, a fucking cog in a wheel or like a chip that goes into your laptop. But like these are animals, man. Like they're built and designed to live on certain environments and be treated a certain way. So the meat industry is completely fucked. I don't know too many of the exact specifics. Other than I've met food processors, we met like the guys who do the padding facility that we work with who help us like take this grass-fed, grass-finished beef and like get it into chubs. They like chop it down and do a good job with this coarseness and how we want it. And they said they've done testing on like the Wendy's specs, for example. And they're like, I would never make that in my facility. I would never feed it to my family after I've seen it. It's like very high in fat, but like it's really low quality fat that's coming from these animals that are like pumped with hormones, antibiotics. So like the easiest way to think about it is like you get what you pay for, right? Like you're going to the fast food place, like the Wendy's or in the McDonald's. There's a reason why it's as cheap as it is. And it's not just because they have all these economies of scale. It's like they're buying literally the cheapest thing that they can give you legally. And when they try to get something cheaper that's like kind of illegal, they're likely going to go work with lobbyists and work with the government to find ways to change the laws so they could do something even worse for you. So the meat stuff is crazy. Transitioning a couple other crazy things. One is bread. There's this thing we were talking about when we met, which is wild, that I learned about from our bakery we work with. There's this thing called potassium bromate. It's a dough conditioner. So it basically like helps dough stay like stretchy and like raised in the oven and all this stuff. But it's like apparently very carcinogenic, so it causes cancer. It has a bunch of problems. It's banned in Europe. It's even banned in California now, I think. They finally got it. And this is something that was for a very long time in all the McDonald's buns, in Subway, I know in particular. So yeah, that's kind of a wild thing. It's just like chemicals that are put into our food to make it last longer and not get mold and to perform better and be more consistent. Like, yeah, there's a reason why when you bake bread at home or buy it from a local bakery, it's going to go bad in a few days. So that's kind of a crazy thing. French fries. I think I saw you put this in the tweet prior to this call. Like, people were like, "What do you mean? There's like 15 ingredients in French fries?" It's like, yeah, like when you're making fries for a giant corporation like McDonald's, like when they first started, and this might be an interesting thing because I saw a lot of people were talking about seed oils in that thread as well. Like,
yes,
beef
we
tallow,
gotta talk about that. I'll get killed if I don't talk about seed oils.
Yeah, I mean, beef tallow is how McDonald's kind of got famous. Beef tallow fries. And for those folks who aren't familiar with beef tallow, like, I don't know that much about it, but basically like they use beef fat rendered down in some way where you get like there's always the famous like duck fat fries at places when you go like in New York or something like that. There's also beef fat you can use as a way to fry things. And there's like kind of a weird story. I don't know all the details of it, but I think a president or somebody basically got sick, like had a heart attack, high cholesterol, and this movement started in the United States like the 80s or something like that, that basically was demonizing beef tallow for frying, which actually, when you start looking into it, it's actually a way better way to do frying, which we'll talk about seed oils and things. But McDonald's back in the day started using beef tallow when they first started out. They were famous for their fries. Their fries were the best. They still make a tasty fry, granted, now. But because they wanted to switch away with this whole movement and be using like what they at the time deemed as like a heart healthier oil, big air quotes there, they were trying to replicate the flavor of beef tallow because they're obsessed with consistency. For their French fries, while also like having them stay golden and be consistent. So there's like a list of 15 ingredients. There's like potatoes, canola oil, soybean oil, hydrogenated soybean oil. There's like hydrolyzed, I don't even know what this means, milk and hydrolyzed wheat. There's dextrose, basically sugar, TBHQ, dimethyl polysiloxane or something, crazy stuff, right? Like these are all in the French fries that go to the McDonald's and are then fried to order for you. And if you go to like, I don't know, Five Guys, or like for us, like we make our own French fries and manufacture them ourselves. Our fries are potatoes, oil, and then we fry them in a restaurant in oil. We then put salt on them. That's what's in our fries.
It's a natural French fry.
Yeah, who knew?
That's the point. Yeah.
Yeah, who knew? So yeah, it's kind of a crazy thing. Like, and what's even crazier about all this stuff too is like the potato industry. We probably don't need to go into all of this, but just like beef, we went through all the crazy stuff that was going on there. Like the same stuff's happening in potatoes. Like the russet Burbank potato that everyone uses is like pretty much nutritionless these days. Like it kind of just caught on because like a big company, Simplot, like made that a thing back in the day, like a white fleshed russet Burbank potato. There's like plenty of other like breeds of potato that work out there, and they're more nutritionally dense and all these things. They spray our potatoes with tons of chemicals, like not only in the field, but then also just to keep them from sprouting in storage. Because like they develop these potatoes to be stored over like the growing season in the winter. When they're not growing potatoes, there's still plenty of potatoes in storage, but they spray them with chemicals. So lots to go into there. I think probably the seed oil thing and the actual frying and final products may be a little more interesting for the sake of this podcast. But yeah, like the big fast food, as you might imagine, like when your eyes are open to it and you pull back the layers a little bit at a time, like it just gets crazier and crazier the more you learn about it, which, for some people, it's like, oh, well, just don't eat fast food. But I think the reality is for so many people, one, it's craveable, it tastes good. People are addicted to it in some ways. Certain communities, it's the only option. It's just a part of the fabric of our country in a lot of ways. So like, I think what we need to do is just like do a better job putting out food that's as craveable, as delicious, but is thoughtful around the ingredients we're giving people, and thoughtful around the portion sizes and thoughtful around all this stuff. Because like, at the end of the day, all of us in this industry as consumers, if you're supporting a restaurant, you're voting for that thing to continue to exist. If you're an actual operator and you're doing these things, like you're the one who is making the decision to put food on the table. And like, if you're a franchisee, like maybe you don't have the decision-making power on this, but you can lobby into your kind of management, explain these things and try to make an impact, or go and support a business that is doing things the right way, or start your own, like there's other ways to do it. I mean, the whole big fast food system, and like, maybe this is a good time to get into like the whole seed oil thing, but the whole big food way things work today, the more you learn about it, is just like, it kind of was set up the way it was set up, and it's been perpetuated by the people that like benefit from it, and we are all kind of like at it's at our expense, our health, our planet, and we gotta all work together to figure out a better way to do it.
No, I mean, that's all right. That's a great breakdown, and I'm sure you could have, you could probably do a whole like college semester course on exactly how it all works, because I'm sure there's a lot. But I think that the tagline is, folks, is that it's not just it's unhealthy. It's like, it's pretty fucked up between the lobbying and the chemicals going into it, and what's being done at the cows. I mean, it's basically like I mean, I don't know. It like just the way you described that, how they're just killed like once every 5 minutes or whatever. It's like feels like just a murder house. And it's just like there's no quality of life. Like I certainly wouldn't want my day to day to be watching those cows just all packed together in one little area. Yeah. So anyway, I do want to get into seed oils, learn about that, but I think that can transition to let's talk about Spudz as well, your CPG brand, and this concept that you said to me of like what, because I asked you, I'm like, well, hey, that's really cool, but like, why are you running a restaurant while also trying to grow a CPG brand of French fries? And you mentioned the concept of like how it's evolved into like potentially the unbundling of fast food, which I think is just super interesting. So before we get to Spudz, and folks, that's Spudz. That's the name of his CPG French fry brand. If you've ever shopped at Sprouts Farmers Market, he's in every Sprouts across the country. I think 400
not quite across
stores
the
in
country.
total.
Not yet.
Okay.
We're working with them. We're in all the stores in California and Arizona right now. We're working with them to go national at some point soon.
Cool.
But yeah, we'll get into all those details. But yeah, we have definitely lots of ways to get you to try some fries.
Yeah. Well, so just on the whole seed oil thing, and like you said, you fry your French fries in oil, which everyone does, right? That's why they're French fries. What's the deal with seed oils? What are you using in your French fries? Can you just give us the quickest rundown you can?
Yeah, so big disclaimer, just to say up front, like we use seed oil in our fryers at our restaurant currently. And this kind of goes back in the idea you mentioned of like unbundling fast food in some ways, like we thinking about recently is like, we genuinely have tried our best to put out the highest quality fast food we can. This like kind of fast food Americana, chicken sandwiches, burgers, shakes, this kind of stuff, at the best price possible. The problem is that what we've talked about, right? There's all this complexity. There isn't a lot of the infrastructure set up to be just like, hey, I need a 35-pound gallon jug of a non-seed oil that I can use in my fryers, like avocado oil, for example, or beef tallow. There's a really awesome company. I want to plug them here. It's called 0 Acre Farms. We've been talking to them in the last, few weeks, months. The CEO, Jeff, is like incredibly knowledgeable. Like I want to stay away from anything scientific on this because he's got all this stuff down. They do so much research and they're building out essentially like a cultured oil, they call it. But it's an oil that doesn't use the traditional farming methods of things like seed oil or canola oil and all that. But it performs the exact same way. It's a 1-to-1 substitute. They're building out basically like, so you can get a 35-pound jug at a restaurant that you use to fill your fryers, but you just swap out one for the other. And we're doing a bunch of testing with this right now. The big point of seed oils that I think everyone needs to kind of realize and like digest, because it's a crazy stat, is that 20% of our calories come from seed oils. Everybody in the country, right? Like think about that. 1 in 5 calories of what you eat every day, everybody, for the most part, comes from seed oils. And you're going to say like, no, that's not true. Like I don't eat that much fried food. Like the reality is that if you're not cooking every single meal at home, you're eating a lot of seed oils because everywhere uses it. Every restaurant is using them in like their dressings and their mayonnaises and their frying and their cooking applications. All processed food, like basically, any processed food, if you look at the labels, it's going to have corn oil, palm oil, soybean oil, canola oil, some sort of oil or fat is going to be in there. And our whole processed food system is based on seed oils. So people, I saw in the people on Twitter like going crazy over seed oils. Like there's a big movement right now that's happening, kind of grassroots. And I'm curious to see how it plays out. Like we've heard about this back in the day as we were getting into grass-fed, grass-finished. Kind of always heard about how bad seed oils were. You can't use olive oil for frying because you can't fry it hot enough where it'll burn basically. Avocado oil or coconut oil don't really work for us either. So we sort of were like, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. And now we've gotten there and we're like really trying to go deep and work with these guys at 0 Acre to figure out a way to produce a seed oil free fry, which we'll maybe talk a little bit more about. But like some of the other crazy stats, like you might say like, okay, well, why don't we just go back to using things like beef tallow? And that's a great idea, right? Like maybe like, okay, there was this weird push in the 80s where people got pushed away from beef tallow. We're doing research on it now. We realize it's actually maybe a way better thing to do for frying when it comes to people's inflammation and their health, like the aldehydes and carcinogens that come from eating these types of oils or cooking them and all this stuff. But the reality is like the scale is the problem. Like I think the stat I heard Jeff talk about on a podcast. So again, he's the expert here. If like people are still want to learn a ton about this, like he should come on the pod and talk about it. But I think 72.6 billion pounds of seed oil are going to be consumed by 2026, which like that's like too big of a number to even fathom. And right now, if like there's about 100 million pounds of beef tallow being produced a year, and that's from not only just like regenerative sources, but all cattle. And they were saying like, even if you got the maximum amount of every single cow in the country, the maximum amount of fat was used for beef tallow, and it was somehow all put towards the food industry instead of being used for like candles or whatever else they use it for, like it would still be like 1 billion or 2 billion pounds, like 1/70th of what we need. So like there just isn't a supply for us to continue. And I think one thing that we try to be practical about is that people are not just going to change their eating habits overnight, right? Like if you're eating fast food, like you're not just gonna be like, oh, I'm gonna switch to salads and cook every meal at home, right? So again, it goes back to having truly competitive products where we can nudge people in the right direction. Progress is better than perfection. How do we sub things out?
Yes.
So that's kind of like the whole seed oil spiel. I don't want to go much deeper than that because it's a little bit out of my professional depth. But going into Spudz and maybe how that got started, that seemed like a good place to go.
Yeah, well, so before we get to Spudz, just because on that nudging people in the right direction, I do want to just touch on it like quickly, because I know there's a few restaurants that maybe they're attempting to do kind of like they have a similar mission as you, but they're taking a different approach, which is like the plant-based fast food. You know, obviously like a lab generated meat is just totally like it's just a different nutritional set in those burgers, if we're gonna, you know, whatever they are, honestly. Yeah, like what are your thoughts on that? Like I'm sure you thought about it at one point, like should we go in that direction, right? And ultimately what was your reasoning for not doing that?
That's an awesome question. I'm glad you steered us this way. So yes, I have a lot of opinions on plant-based burgers chains. I think in some ways they kind of have a similar mission and we're doing things, you know, quote unquote the right way, or at least like the right intentions, which is how, if we're not going to convince people to change their diets, how can we point them in the right direction and make progress? And the idea was, let's sub out beef for what we deem as like as good, right? Like mimicking beef with Impossible or Beyond. In my opinion, again, like where things kind of go wrong is that when you look at these ingredient labels, it's still supporting the same centralized conventional supply chain and food system. They're using things like pea protein or soy protein concentrate. They're still using things like sunflower oil and these seed oils in it. So like from an environmental standpoint, from an energy standpoint, from a nutritional standpoint, like it's not making a lot of progress. Like I think it's probably better for you and generally better for the planet to eat an Impossible burger over a Whopper or something like that, right? Because like we just talked about how bad some of the big fast food things are around beef.
Yeah.
But when you're comparing like a Beyond Meat patty to like a regeneratively raised grass-finished beef burger, like it's not the same thing at all. It's like completely different. I do want to give a shout out to a couple plant-based chains, which I think actually do a good job, and maybe just like we'll omit the ones that maybe have a negative opinion on. You guys can draw conclusions to that, but the ones I'd say that do a really good job. One is Amy's drive-thru on the West Coast. So they're started by the same CPG company, Amy's, that did like vegan and vegetarian like frozen meals for a long time. They make their own veggie burgers, their own patties from vegetables. And like when you go to their fast food experience, it doesn't like scream like we're vegan. It's more just like a fun, wholesome fast food experience that happens to use vegetarian ingredients and still have fun things like chili cheese fries and stuff like that. So I think they're a good example of like a model that's interesting. There's also a company called Wood Burger up in the New York area. They're using Impossible or Beyond, I think. So like I'm not a huge fan of that piece of it. That being said, like I love that they're just like trying to create a fun fast food brand. It isn't trying to be like, we're saving the planet, we're doing all this stuff. Because like, in my opinion, when you actually get into like the real details of it, I don't want to name any names, but the companies that are out there doing fast food that are fully all in on Beyond or Impossible, like they're not really doing anything that sustainable, that amazing. but like, they're solving a need for like a vegan customer. Whereas like somewhere like this Moonburger place, they're trying to appeal to just like somebody who wants a fast food Americana experience and make it taste good, and trying to win on that angle, not trying to win because they're like this weird niche thing. So yeah, I mean, we've always just made our own burgers. My thought is like, if you want a veggie burger, we should make it out of vegetables. We use like quinoa, sweet potatoes, things like chia seeds, and like for like binding and bringing it all together. Lentils on blankets. I'm very great at the top of my head here, but we like make a really great.
Oh, so you do sell a veggie burger?
Yeah, we sell a veggie burger, but it's made with vegetables. We make it ourselves.
Nice.
It's not. Who knew? But yeah, it's not like a huge like mover for us. Like, but I think it's awesome. Like, we want to make it so that if you're with a group of friends and someone has a preference towards veggie, or like they're vegetarian or whatever, like if you're vegan or vegetarian and it's because of like the ethics or morality of killing animals, I'm 100% on board with you. That's like great, good for you. Like, you should not saying it in a sarcastic way. Like, that is great. If that's your reason, and like you're 100% doing the right thing. If it's full on for sustainability or like some sort of environmental footprint, one, I think when you are supporting things like regenerative, grass-fed, grass-finished beef, it actually can be net positive for the environment. And two, like, the reality that we see is that people aren't just going to automatically stop eating fast food or burgers and fries. So we need to start, to our point, like, make progress. How do we push it in the right direction and give people an alternative that's genuinely better for them, that's genuinely better for the environment? And rather than trying to like convince people to like shame them into stop eating these things, because that's just not how people work.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it's just, especially, the reality, this is America. Americans love their beef and they love their fast food. So yeah, it seems unrealistic to just think that like cold turkey, we're going to change the culture of America on this overnight. And really the taste preferences, the eating habits that are just, we've unfortunately, at this point, the machine has been built and it is a monster of a machine. And as you said, it's not even just about the individuals, just the power that these big corporations have, the McDonald's of the world, the lobbying powers, there's so much behind the scenes that like your average person, like even, no disrespect, but like even you, right, you're a small restaurant. You're up against it, man. It's David versus Goliath. But obviously tons of respect for what you're trying to do. And I think you're going about it in the right way. And again, that element of practicality is super critical because progress, not perfection. It is exactly it, because if you can get people on this healthier path of eating that burger that is grass-fed, grass-finished with the regenerative process behind it, and then, over time, and I know you have a long-term vision, right? There's ways where you can build on that supply chain and ultimately, right, scale it so that now you're making a national impact. And so while it may be seed oils today, and, that veggie burger isn't necessarily as perfect as you wanted or whatever the case may be, like, you're still heading in the right direction, which is better than, there are probably people who, might try to shit on that because it's like, oh, it's not perfect, but it's like, hey, if you got to be realistic, you need people coming in, you need the price points to be right, because people aren't going to just buy it. If you could make the perfect food for a $26 meal, but that's a pricey burger and fries now we're talking about. So anyway, that's my little quick rant. But Spudz,
I think you just gave us the perfect segue, because you're talking about like economies of scale, right? It's like when you get scale, that makes it affordable. That's kind of like we stumbled into it during COVID because we made house cut fries. Since our like hot dog days way back in the day, we always were like, quote unquote, like locally famous for our fries. We had really great fries. Made them ourselves, house cut, did this kind of like Belgian style twice fried fry, the same kind of quality fry you get going to a high-end restaurant. We were doing that for food trucks and for a restaurant. And when COVID hit, we were trying to figure out like, how do we, one, solve something for ourselves operationally, because we're trying to do fresh cut fries, demands all over the place, and we don't know what's going to happen day to day. Like, is there something we can do? And two, like over 50% of our business went digital overnight, right? Like delivery. Specifically, we'd never dealt with that. We'd always be cooking to order off of food trucks and things. So we got in the lab. We had a lot of free time on our hands given COVID and all the crazy shit that was going on. And we redesigned and re-engineered our process where we made at a centralized location where we used to run our food trucks out of, we created like a mini factory to make a hand-cut fry there, but then freezing it in the process. So we actually found that by freezing it, you get like a crust on the outside. Like if you talk to any high-end chefs, they probably know this too, where like you refrigerate and cool down the fries before you fry them. Freezing them is obviously better, but usually impractical in a restaurant kitchen. In that you have this like layer on the outside. So when you drop it into a hot fryer, it fries up that outside layer. It gives you a nice crispy outside, but keeps that like fluffy mashed potato inside. That is like in our mind, the restaurant quality fry. So when we did this, we like kind of had this aha moment that not only is this a way better house cut fry that you can just like open a bag and have ready in 2 minutes and 30 seconds, but also like now that it's frozen, like we could put this in the grocery store. We went and started walking the aisles and realized like, holy shit, these are the same brands in the 90s when we were kids with our parents in the grocery store. The same, red and yellow bags, the same sort of negative stigma around fast food, around like the quote unquote like freezer fries, like the oven fries that you maybe had growing up and just like dumped in ketchup. And you're like, they never were like that good, but like, it was French fries. It's just like part of your meal, something you maybe grow a little bit fond of. So we started making Spudz Fries, SPUDZ, like you mentioned, and just playing around with them and testing them out. We did seasoned versions. We did like a sea salt one, a rosemary garlic, and Chesapeake. So I'm like an Old Bay inspired one, like very regional, this area. And when we started testing them out, like you could put them in the air fryer or the oven to finish them and have them come out of there, and they tasted amazing. And like, of course, it's not going to be the exact same quality as coming out of a deep fryer, but these are literally the exact same fries we use at our restaurant. So like, if you did take our sea salt fries, for example, and you put some oil on your stove and you fried them up at 350, like you're going to have the exact same restaurant fry that you're getting out of the store, which is kind of amazing because as we learn more about the supply chain of where these things are coming from, there's basically like 3 or 4 companies in the entire North America that almost own the whole industry when it comes to potato manufacturing. There's like Simplot, Lamb Weston, The Cane, Ore-Ida, which is owned by Kraft Heinz. And these giant companies are the ones that like make McDonald's fries, for example, right? They own these $100 million factories, multi-$100 million factories. And when you're doing it at that scale, every second counts, right? So they start cutting corners a little bit and they do things to try to have as many pounds of fries go through their lines as fast as possible. So naturally, you're not going to get the highest quality thing. And we realized that by owning our own manufacturing that we could tweak and tinker and do some cool stuff. And we wanted to prove out and kind of incubate this idea. Could we be serving, like making lots of fries for not only our restaurant, but other restaurants? Could we grow these frozen fry brand in the grocery store? And the idea is that, to your point, if we want to scale a fast food restaurant doing things better nationally, we've got to find ways to get these economies of scale that the McDonald's or Burger King or Wendy's have when they're have thousands and thousands of units. And we realized that like out of one factory, we can sell to thousands of grocery stores across the country or tons of restaurants, and that we can actually achieve some of the same buying power and some of the same efficiencies that these big guys have. And by building our own network of regional farmers, and we've had some experience doing that in the restaurant, the beef side of things. So building up a network of like getting organic potatoes in the area. We're working on that right now, and like getting them to grow on the East Coast and having a direct relationship. And talking to folks like Zero Acre, we're trying to figure out how we can do a CPG, completely seed oil, simple ingredient CPG fry and like upgrade our fries there. So we're in the process of really building out this potato manufacturing side of the business. And that idea, like unbundling fast food. How do we take the profit driver of fast food restaurants, French fries? How do we achieve economies of scale by like kind of taking what's like a Tesla business model, like a premium French fry that's just way better than the stuff in the grocery store? Start there and like work our costs down. Give other restaurants that want to do a house cut fry, quality fry, and give them something that they can do. Grow that way, so that we're in a position we grow our brand that we can get super high quality fries consistently across the country at a price that still allows us to be, doing things like combo meals and value meals and making money. Because, if we can't prove a fast food model that actually makes money and is, close to as profitable, if not as profitable as some of these other franchises, we can't scale, we can't support a better food system. We try to keep things pretty practical, and by focusing on this little bit of complexity on the back end, building a potato manufacturer and building a CPG brand that stands for something better. We're actually in the works of rebranding the Spudz thing to Jesse and Ben's, because we think there's, it's just missing actually having people behind the product. is the real issue. It's these giant corporations that are producing millions of pounds an hour at some point. Instead, like, what if it was just like people that are trying to bring a little bit of personality and fun flavors to the aisle or to the restaurant and give you something that, you can feel strongly about and feel like you're supporting the David versus the Goliath, supporting better farming practices, supporting a better company that's trying to, do all these things and creating a better food system.
No, for sure. I mean, it's fascinating because you basically, right, you have learned about the problems of trying to ship basically a product you're proud of to your customers, but at the same time now you've kind of moved up the chain because, as we've talked about, like this big fast food machine, this monster that's been created. The only way to sustainably and fix it, right, is to fix the source and the root of the problem, which is the supplying of the goods. So yeah, I think it's really fascinating that now you're kind of like trying to almost create a better solution for not just yourself, for all restaurants, right? And then if you can do that, then the system as a whole has a chance at changing. Obviously, there would become, assuming this does work, and I hope it does, and I hope you scale, there'd kind of be this, you'd be this like upstart supplier, right, of the new wave and the healthier wave of food against the incumbents. But yeah, I think it's just super interesting because you really are just kind of like starting at square one again and rethinking how everything should be done. And that's often, I mean, so many businesses, great businesses get built that way because the established players, right, they're all built around the old way of doing things. And for them to change, right, they're counter-positioned against this. However you're sourcing it and the lack of ingredients and lack of preservatives, it's a whole different structure that it really leaves them unable to basically change their way because it would forego and cause so much rapid changes and so much, revenue disruptions, let's say, if they were to try to rebuild their own system as it is today. So yeah, I mean, I guess just with Spudz, I think, did you mention you're thinking of, for that project specifically, raising money for it to kind of expand operations and hopefully get a little bit more awareness for the brand and expand into more grocery stores?
Yeah, that is something that we're thinking a lot about. And we are at an interesting inflection point in our business because we've got, this restaurant brand's got a flagship location that's finally doing well coming out of COVID. We've got this great exposure in stadiums. And now on the other hand, we've got this French fry brand that we launched just about a year ago. We had been playing around with it for a while, and then we launched into a distributor on the East Coast called Rainforest Distribution that does some stuff with like Whole Foods and those guys. We got into about 180 accounts in 6 months, which is pretty fast. And they were really excited about it. Ended up, like you mentioned, in Sprouts Farmers Market, which is one of the leading natural grocery stores. We're in 120 locations with them on the West Coast. We just picked up Fresh Time, which is in the Midwest, doing something similar with the natural grocery. We're getting into our first Whole Foods store. We've been supplying our own food service fries to our restaurants. We have some other customers that are interested in coming on board. So we've got these two businesses that are both growing, and we're realizing that it really is going to take lots of focus, lots of energy. It's going to also take going a little bit faster because this is a big problem. It needs to be changed sooner rather than later. So we're in the process of raising some money, especially on this potato side of the business, because we believe that with some infrastructure and manufacturing and with some, float on things like inventory, because it's kind of a weird thing we've learned a lot about on scaling a CPG brand. You're using these big distributors that are similar to the Cisco's and the US Foods. They're called KE and UNFI. Like, you sell product to them and they distribute to all your accounts. You don't get paid for 90 or 120 days sometimes. Kind of crazy. You're filling all this inventory. You're manufacturing tons of potatoes. You're buying seed and buying potatoes from farmers. So it's a big endeavor. We're really excited about it, and we believe that we can build a $50+ million business pretty fast, because anyone in listening here who owns a restaurant that sells French fries, or you might just think about it too, if you're a consumer and you go somewhere that has fries that are good, everyone orders fries. It's part of the American culture. And, one grocery store, for example, like if we are doing great and we're selling multiple cases for every SKU, every flavor in the grocery store per week, we might do like $2,000 or $3,000 per grocery store, which is awesome from our wholesale product. But what's crazy is like one restaurant might be a $70,000 or $100,000 account for us, which is kind of unbelievable because that's how many French fries people are buying at outside of the house when they're getting the drive-thru or they're getting eating at their favorite local restaurant. So, we think it's a really big opportunity, and we're really excited to get that economy of scale as fast as possible. Because like we talked about, the faster we can do that, we can support farms that are doing things like regenerative organic practices in their potato farming the same way people do it with cows, which is pretty cool. We can support a better, more regional network of potatoes. We can create a better French fry that's supporting all these things and start that unbundling process of building a better infrastructure or manufacturing system to help support restaurants who do get excited about this future of we don't have to just stick with all the same companies that have been around for 100 years or 50 years just because they're the only option right now. And we are building this thing kind of on the shoulders of giants. We joke around a lot about how bad the food system is and major players, but at the end of the day, these things, I don't think there's all bad people in the C-suite of these companies, right? They care about these things, but how do you steer a cruise ship? How do you manage your public company and you've got quarterly earnings that you need to, you're trying to keep your job. So they can't do some of the things that we can do as a small company who's building this into our ethos and what we do from day one. And that what gets us excited is that we can come in, show and prove a model that's better and works better. And then we hope that these big guys come and try to compete with us. And we're excited to go toe to toe with them. And we think we can beat up on them. But at the very end of the day, if we can raise the floor and raise quality, it's only going to be better for everybody.
Yeah, no, it's super exciting. And I love the kind of just the scrappy mentality and even the initiative to do this, because most people wouldn't think about running restaurants enough to then have the ability and the savviness to be able to get where you are today, where you're, like you said, you've expanded throughout DC. You're obviously doing a great job in the restaurant. I mean, your burger, as we said, is considered one of the best burgers in the area. That's not in the Washington Post, right? It's not like some random food blogger. No disrespect to the food bloggers out there, but it is that's a pretty serious publication. So yeah, you're obviously doing both at a high level. So it's super awesome. Yeah, I mean, look, I hope for everyone listening, this has kind of just been, the goal here was an eye opener. Obviously, everyone knows fast food is not healthy for you, right? But to understand, as Jesse has said, as you kind of peel back the layers, there's a lot more going on that probably makes, I'm sure some listeners have probably been like, oh, wow, I'm feeling a little queasy inside, as I did when I met Jesse for coffee. So, yeah, Jesse, thanks so much for the education, for telling us about Spudz and Swizzlers. And, I'm excited to watch it grow and, obviously, eagerly awaiting the day, if it and when it ever comes, that if you do decide to franchise the restaurant, but time will tell. I know you haven't made up your mind there. But yeah, thanks so much. And, for folks who maybe want to get in touch with you, learn more about this, learn about Spudz and your business is more, what's the best spot where they can, get in touch with you online and follow your brands?
Yeah. Thank you for taking the time. It's awesome to be able to use this platform you guys have built and to be speaking to so many people. Like I said, I think it's awesome to have folks that are interested in this side of the business and food or franchising or growing businesses and doing things a little differently, because if you listen this far in, more power to you. I really appreciate you guys. I hope that when you hear this, you're either amped up and optimistic, or even if you're just pissed off, either way, you're getting it, in that we can't just be passive players sitting on the sidelines. I think we can all, whether it's as a consumer, as a business owner, we can all take a very active role in helping build a better system for giving all of us the foods we actually love to eat and get excited about and bringing people together, but doing it in a way that's less harmful for people on the planet. So just a big ups to all you guys who are still listening. If you're just generally want to chat, want to connect. Would love to talk to as many of you as possible. You could DM me on Twitter. It's Jesse_Konig is my name. Our restaurant is Swizzler Foods. If you want to check out some of the stuff about what our food looks like, our brand and all that. Like, especially on this restaurant side of things, if you're interested in like investing, franchising, opening a franchise, like any of that stuff, like we'd love to connect and talk more about it. There's definitely lots of opportunity to get involved as we're growing that side of the business. I think, like, Wolf, you mentioned, we have plans to grow, and like it's not just because we want to scale all over the country because it'd be cool or we're going to get wealthy off of it. Like, we have this bigger vision to make an impact at scale, and like you need to have scale to be truly competitive. So, looking for people that have experience who get excited about that kind of thing. If you're interested in learning more about getting involved in the potato manufacturing side of our business, like we talked about, we are raising some money. We're going out to really get after this thing. We haven't quite formally started the process, but if you want to DM me again, or if you want to shoot me an email at Jesse, Jesse, at SwizzlerFoods.com or Jesse at SpudzFries.com, either one works, goes right to me. Or again, just DM me on Twitter. Happy to fill you in or get you on the list so we can talk more about it as things develop. Or if you're like just interested in buying better fries or, learning how to get seed oil free at your restaurant or more about that whole thing. Like I said, I've been talking to Jeff at Zero Acres. They're awesome people. I don't want to put his email on blast, but if you DM me, I can get you an introduction to them so you guys can try it out. We're in the process of, really testing this stuff and making sure it works for our operation. But odds are we're going to be having a seed oil free restaurant French fry that we can sell. If people are interested in that, we're in the grocery store. If you want to, you can go to seedoilfreefries.com. We put up a landing page there just so, we have an easy place to just collect emails and get people who are interested. And yeah, if you're looking for a house cut fry without all the hassle of the labor and consistency issues and all the stuff we've dealt with as restaurant operators, we're getting excited to blow out that side of our business in the next 6 to 9 months. And we'd love to talk to you about getting you some great French fries that are coming from great sources, farmers, and being more involved in the process, working with the manufacturer. And we've dealt with all the headaches, and we're happy to work with you guys on trying to make it as hassle-free as possible, because we know people on the front lines doing restaurant stuff, you guys work so damn hard, whether it's at 1 unit or 100 units. It's a really hard business, and our goal is for you guys to make more money, to serve better food, to get more reviews, to do all that stuff that's important. And we've been there, been in the trenches. So anything we can do to help, whether it's just pointing people in the right direction, sending someone an introduction, getting you involved in investing or selling you guys fries, or, just connecting with suppliers. I'm an open book, Jesse_Konig, Konig on Twitter, or email me, Jesse, Jesse at SwizzlerFoods.com.
Amazing. Yeah. Thanks so much, Jesse. I think folks are really going to love learning about this, and probably will want some French fries and some more knowledge on French fries. So, yeah, man, look, this was a ton of fun. I'm again just really excited to watch everything grow. So, looking forward to that, folks. We'll plug his show notes and Twitter, we'll plug his Twitter link and all the other good stuff in the show notes. Yeah, man, look, this was awesome, and we'll catch up soon.
Man. Sounds good. Thanks for your grab.
Thanks for listening to Franchise Empires. We're coming to you soon with actionable insights to take the next step on your franchise journey. So make sure to subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen.